In today's tutorial, we'll be learning the very basics of crochet. Now, all you really need is a hook and some yarn, a darning needle, a stitch marker, and a pair of scissors. Now, it doesn't really matter what size your hook is, not at first, or the size of your yarn. They are things that you worry about more when you're learning sort of patterns. But since we're just going to be making a very simple swatch, don't worry about the size of the hook that you're using or the size of your yarn. I will be using a 5mm today. This is the most common hook. It's very easy to get the hang of with this particular one because the hook is not too small and it's not too large. It's absolutely perfect. This particular yarn, it's referred to as DK or double knit. It's the most common yarn that you'll find in any shop. It's acrylic. It's fairly cheap to buy and you don't need anything fancy. You don't need to spend £10 on a ball of yarn to learn. Just pick up just a normal ball of yarn. It'll cost you a couple of pounds. That's all you really need. And my advice is when you're starting, get yourself a nice sort of bright colour that isn't dark, it isn't black. Don't get yourself black yarn for the first time you try. Trust me, you will not see the stitches. So get yourself a nice bright yarn and it will enable you to see what you're doing. Okay, so let's get on with this. The very first thing you will need to learn is called a slipknot. Now there are several ways of doing it. You'll notice on many of the tutorials people will be doing them in all sorts of ways, whether they use their finger, whether they use their hook, whether they just hold the yarn like that. Everybody has a different preference for making a slipknot and here is mine. So you take the yarn, hold it on your finger as so, and you use your thumb to just very gently hold the yarn. And then you wrap it around your finger and you create an X. And now what you do is you take this particular part and you pull it over this part and then you pull it through and there's your slipknot. Another way of doing it, again, you make the cross on your finger and you use your hook. You you pop your hook through the first bit of yarn and then you use the hook to grab the other part and you pull it through and there you go. Practice that a few times. Practice it in different ways just until you get used to it. So just keep making that X on your finger and then pulling this part of the yarn over this part and then pulling it through to create a knot. Pop it on your hook and then tighten it, but don't make it too tight, just very gently tighten it. Now this particular part is known as the tail. Make sure it's nice and long. If it's too short, then do your slipknot again and make sure you leave it fairly long. Now what we're going to do with this part is we're going to just gently tuck it out of the way with this hand. Now this particular part of the yarn, which is connected to the rest of the yarn, this is what we'll be working with. It is referred to as the working end. And now we'll be making chains. Now I highly recommend you practice and practice and practice because when you first make your chains, they're not going to be great. Some of them will be tight, some of them will be loose, but that's okay. It's part of the learning process. Now just remember, you are learning, take it easy on yourself and go as slowly as you need and keep rewatching parts of the video until you get used to doing what you're doing. For example, keep watching how to make a slipknot until you've made it several times to the point where you can make it without thinking about it. And the same with chains. So very simple. Now you take your hook and you simply wrap it around the yarn like that, and then you pull through this hole and there's your chain. I'll show you that again. Wrap the yarn around, pull your hook through, there's your chain. Wrap the yarn around, pull your hook through, there's your chain. Wrap the yarn around, pull your hook through, there's your chain. Wrap the yarn around, pull the hook through, and keep going. Just doesn't matter how many chains you're making, just keep practicing until it just becomes second nature and you don't have to think about it. And then pretty soon you'll be able to speed up a little bit. Just keep practicing. So once again, wrap the yarn around, pull the hook through. Now you may be noticing my hands and my fingers and what they're doing. So this particular finger is very gently holding on to the top of the yarn here, and this particular finger is holding on here. Now I'm not holding too tight, I'm not pushing down, I'm not tugging on the yarn. This is just to help the yarn stay in place, otherwise known as tension, and that's how I can get a nice consistency within how big my loops are. I'll show you that again. So I'm using this finger to push the yarn up, I'm using this finger to wrap the yarn around, and then I'm very gently holding on to the previous chains, and then I'm using the hook to pull the yarn through, and I'm using this finger to tug the yarn back. Once again, yarn over, hold on to the yarn gently, pull the hook through, and use this finger to just... It basically ensures that this particular part of the yarn doesn't fall off your hook and doesn't wiggle around too much. Because if it wiggles around too much, you'll find that the loop will get bigger and bigger. So try not to do that. Don't worry too much about that now. You will find your own way of doing this. This is just something I've picked up over the years that I didn't really realise I was doing it until I did realise. And then I realised it just came very, very natural to me. And I found it actually really, really helped with my tension. So just keep practicing those chains. Practice and practice, because yeah, as I say, practice makes perfect, or as I like to say, practice makes progress. Because we don't want perfection right now, we're just learning. We don't want to think about perfection right now, that's not what this is all about. This is about just learning a few moves, getting used to it, and allowing it to become muscle memory to the point where you just naturally do it. You don't think about it, you barely even look at the yarn as it's doing this. And you'll find that your hands will just naturally rest wherever they want to rest. And that right there is known as the chain stitch. I'm just going to pull this apart and we're going to start again. Now that you've practiced making a slip knot and a chain, I want you to do that again. So make sure you've got a nice long tail. Make that X. Pull the yarn over. Tuck this one through to make a nice big slip knot. Put your hook through and don't tighten it, just very, very gently tug on it there. Okay, hide this tail. And now we are going to make 10 chains. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And now we're going to make one more chain, and I'll tell you the reason for that. This is the chain that will start your row. Okay, so the next stitch I'm going to teach you is known as a foundational stitch. You'll notice with different videos there is different terminology for this. I am using what is known as UK terminology, and I do put US terminology up on the screen. Now the difference between UK and US is very, very minimal. For example, I'm going to be teaching you the double crochet. In US terminology that is known as the single crochet, and it's a very, very foundational stitch. Your first foundational stitches will be the double crochet, the half treble crochet, and the treble crochet. And along with that is also the slip stitch. Now the slip stitch comes into play later on, and I'll show you that. So we have here a double crochet, or in US terms, single crochet. Now you will find it somewhat overwhelming to hear different terminology at first, but you'll start to just notice subtle differences. For example, let's say you're looking at a pattern, you can't quite read it, the words look quite alien to you at the moment, but you'll notice SC, which stands for single crochet. Now that indicates to you that that will be an American / US terminology pattern. In UK terminology, you will notice double crochet, half treble crochet, treble crochet. Now, in US terminology, the half treble is known as the half double. Again, an indication for you what terminology you're looking at. But again, I don't want to baffle you too much with different terms. I'm just going to be very simple about this. But I just wanted to prepare you for other tutorials that may be in US terms. Now, most of the time, people will let you know whether they're working in US or UK terminology. Sometimes they don't. I think after a while, people tend to take for granted the terminology that they do use. And that's why I like to put the US terminology up on the screen, because I learned UK terminology and it makes more sense to me. Now, people often say that US terminology makes a lot more sense to them because of the single crochet, whereas double crochet in US terms means something completely different. But don't worry yourself about that at the moment. Okay, so the double crochet is known as a foundational stitch, and it's because it's the foundation of a lot of other stitches. The more advanced stitches, for example, do use double crochet, but it's dressed up in fancier names like the crisscross stitch or the granny stitch or other terminology like that. And that's why it's very important to learn the foundations before you learn any other type of stitch. Now, I'm going to stop waffling and I'm going to teach you. Right, so on the hook, this loop right here is not a stitch. The stitch right next to it is part of the stitch from the previous row, the chain stitch, and we'll be going into the stitch next to that. So it's the second stitch from the hook. So take your hook and pop it through that stitch. And you have 2 loops on the hook. Now take your working yarn and yarn over that hook and go through the first loop, and you have 2 loops on the hook. Now yarn over once more and go through all of those stitches. I shall show you that again. Now the second stitch is right here. This stitch here is part of the previous stitch, so try not to go in that. You will notice the first few goes you probably will go into this stitch, but that's okay. Like I said, we're all learning right here. So this stitch right here is your second stitch. So pop your hook through that stitch. You have 2 loops on the hook, yarn over, go through that first loop, you have 2 loops on the hook, yarn over, and then go through all of those loops, and that's your second stitch. And keep doing that for the rest of the row. So you go through your third stitch, 2 loops on the hook, yarn over, pull through, 2 loops on the hook, yarn over, pull through all loops. And just keep doing that until you reach the end of this row. Go nice and slowly. If you need to rewind back to refresh how to do this, keep doing that. You'll find that this first row is a bit tricky for a first time. You'll find sometimes the loops will be huge, sometimes the loops will be a little bit too tight. Don't worry about that right now. Just concentrate on the stitches. Concentrate on what's going on with the hook. So once again, you'll notice my fingers doing quite an important job here of keeping the tension. So put the hook through, and you'll notice my finger pulling the yarn up the hook, yarn over, and I'll very gently hold onto this yarn here, pull the hook through, 2 loops on the hook. Again, my finger is making sure that that doesn't fall off of the hook, yarn over, and I very gently hold onto the yarn at the bottom here, and then go through all of those loops. Now we only have a few more left of this row. We only have 3 more stitches. So go through the yarn, yarn over, go through once, 2 loops on the hook, yarn over, and go through again. Go through the stitch, yarn over, pull the hook through, 2 loops on the hook, yarn over, pull through all. And then for this very last stitch, that's your very first row done. Now for the second row, it's ever so slightly different and somewhat easier. So we're going to yarn over and pull through, and that's another chain stitch. Chain stitch is very important for this. And now what we're going to do is we're going to turn our yarn around. Now practice that a few times. It's just like turning a book. Now this is very important because you always need to be on this side of the yarn. Your hook always needs to be on the right. If you are left-handed, it will be literally reversed. So here are the stitches on the second row. They look like V shapes, or I suppose you could say they also look like C shapes. Now once again, we're going to ignore what's on the hook, and we're not going to go into this first stitch here, we're going to go into the second stitch. This first stitch is part of the stitch that's already on the hook, which was part of the chain from the previous row. So we're going to go into the second stitch from the hook. So take your hook, and what we're going to do now is we're going to go through both of those stitches, so basically underneath the V. So take your hook and go through both stitches. So now we have 3 stitches on the hook. Going to yarn over and go through the first 2, and we're left with 2 stitches, yarn over, go through 2. That's the first stitch of the second row. Once again, put your hook through both of those stitches, aka the V-stitch, and then yarn over, pull through, 2 loops on the hook, yarn over, pull through both loops. Once again, my stomach's rumbling. Okay, once again, take that hook, push it through, so you have 3 loops on the hook, and then yarn over, pull through, you have 2 loops on the hook, yarn over, pull through both loops. And then just keep doing that until you reach the end of the row. Once again, if you need to, pause the video, rewind the video, and keep practicing. So, hook through both loops, yarn over, pull through those first 2 loops, you have 2 loops on the hook, yarn over, pull through all of those loops. Do that again. And the more you do this, the more you practice, the quicker you will get. And it will become muscle memory. And you'll just do it without really thinking about it. Be very mindful of your stitches and keep count. Now, we started off with 10, so we want to finish with 10. So this is the 9th stitch just here. And this right here at the end, this last V shape, is the 10th. Now you'll find the stitch at the end can sometimes be hard to see, but over time you'll get used to that. Sometimes it's a lot easier just to go through that one loop, and whilst you're learning, that may be the easiest option for you, but try to go through both loops on the hook and then you'll have a nice clean edge. And that is your 2nd row. Now your 3rd row is exactly the same as your 2nd row. So make a chain, turn your work, and you're back to the beginning. So this stitch right here is a stitch from the previous row, so you ignore it and you go through the 2nd stitch, which is here. And you'll find on this row, it's somewhat easier to get through those V's because the work has loosened up. So much like the 2nd row, you go through those V's, you pick up the yarn, you pull through, you have 2 loops on the hook, yarn over, pull through all of those loops. And just keep doing that until you reach the end. Now, as this is only a swatch, we're not making anything as such, we're just practicing. So it doesn't matter how many rows you make, how long it is, it doesn't matter if the ends curve a little bit, it doesn't matter if the loops are too big or too tight, you're just practicing. And I highly recommend before you start learning any type of pattern, before you start making anything, just practice doing this. Just practice making rows. Just practice chaining it up. Practice turning your work. And look at your stitches so you can learn how to identify them and learn that this first stitch is from the previous row. The 2nd stitch here, this one here, is the one you need to go through. Over time, it will become natural. It will become something that you don't really think about, you'll just know. You'll just see the stitches, you'll understand it. It may take time, it may take a few goes, it may take a few projects for you to really, truly understand what you're doing. But don't give up, keep going, keep trying. And you'll find crochet is very, very addictive. Very addictive. you'll find you'll be buying balls of yarn, you'll be reading magazines, you'll be watching tutorials, you'll be thinking, right, I've learnt this stitch, I want to do something with it, I want to make something. Now I highly recommend, if you want to make something, start with something simple. Now you'll notice as this swatch grows, as it becomes a square, you can maybe use it as a coaster. I'll show you some of my coasters. For example, this one, and it's looking a little bit grotty right now, but this was a swatch that I was learning a little bit of French knitting, and I decided rather than just chucking it in a bag somewhere, I would just use it as a coaster. It's just fun to keep your first items, your first swatches. It's a lot of fun to keep them and look back on them. For example, my first swatches were questionable. I kept all of them because I just thought it was really, really funny more than anything how many swatches I went through before I got the hang of it. But I kept going, and I must admit, it took me an entire day, but I got there. I went from a very, very curly piece of work that kind of looked all sort of bent up out of shape like this, with the loops all over the place, to having a nice straight piece of work like this. Now, it may take you a few hours, it may take you a few days, it may take you a week, it may take you a month, but if you keep practicing, you'll find your work will improve. The more you understand what you're doing, the more you'll see it. Now, I'm going to show you how to end your piece of work. So what we do is we chain up, we leave a nice long tail, we snip off, and we use the hook to pull that through and tighten it. Don't tighten it too much, you don't want it to ruin your work, you don't want your work to suddenly curl up. And now with the darning needle, you're going to hide this tail within your work. Now you'll notice what I did there. In order to get your wool into the eyelet, you basically, I was doing that without really telling you what I was doing, you basically fold over the yarn and flatten it with your fingers, and then push it through the eyelet, and there you go. Nice and easy. Practice that a few times. Like I said, just keep practicing everything. And now what you want to do is you just want to just sew it into your work, just pop it in there. Don't tug on the yarn too much, you don't want it to pull any of your stitches, but sew these stitches into a few different places so it catches the yarn and you can hide your tail. And then just snip off as close to the work. There you go. That's one tail hidden. And then do the same thing with the starter tail. Just pop it through the stitches. You don't have to be super duper amazing at this. Just pop it pop it through a few stitches. For this swatch, it doesn't really matter about perfection, just as long as it hides your tail. And there we have it, your very first swatch. Now you'll notice that it's not perfect, it's a little bit curly, but that's okay. It's just a swatch, it's just a practice piece. In time, you will learn how to make them sit nice and straight, sit nice and square. But until now, that's all you really need. Now I will be continuing on this beginner series with some more stitches, so if that interests you, if you want to learn more, then do look out for other videos. And until then, keep practicing this one, and I'm just going to pop in a few pictures of some of my very first goes. This will give you a little bit of a chuckle, so do enjoy, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye!